Hello, my name is Corey Yellow. I am your photographer slash videographer instructor for FINO this year. Um, uh, a little background about my history into this. I've been doing photography for about 11 years. I've been doing photography since about 2011 to be exact. Um, I eventually, about 5 years ago, within this time frame, uh, went into videography. It's pretty much standard. A lot of videographers start off as photographers. So if you're into videography today, I'm sorry, if you're into photography today, don't be surprised if you get into videography tomorrow. Okay. Um, uh, what we're going to talk about today is four main things. What we're going to talk about today is lighting, ISO, shutter speed, and aperture, which is also known as an f-stop. We're going to talk about the purpose of these, the uses of these, and so forth. Photography. What is photography? Photography, I like to define as painting with light. Okay? There is no photography or videography for this matter if there's no light. Okay? Um, the light pretty much think of it as painting on a canvas. Okay? Um, you have to know how to set up your lighting, um, and where the lighting goes, you know, um, and so forth. ISO, just to breeze over it. All right. This is basically the setting that's going to determine how much. I know it is noise, but you may know it is static for today. All right. It's going to determine how much of that you see in a picture. Your f-stop. Like when you're looking at a picture and you see it's blurred off in the background, but it's focused in the foreground, or vice versa. That's the aperture controlling that. Okay. And as far as the shutter speed is how long your lens is going to stay open before it closes. The longer the lens is open, the longer there's going to be light let into your picture, which is going to either bleed out your subject with nothing but white if it's open too long, or darken the subject to the point where it's nothing but black if it's open too shortly. Okay, so those are the four main elements we're going to talk about today. Lighting. Just a side story. How I learned lighting mainly was back in 2011. I used to apply to be an extra on the movie sets a lot. And what I used to do is I used to apply for these positions not for the money. I used to apply for them for the experience by observing the light crews on the movie sets. That's why when a lot of people see my work, they tell me, you know, uh, it seems like something out of a movie. It's because I apply what I learned in the Hollywood movie setting to my photography and videography in real life. All right. So the first part of light I want to talk about is a key light. A key light is what lights up the main subject, which is myself. I'm the subject, and I'm pretty well lit. Okay. So once you turn that light off, you see the effects that it has. All right. I have no key light on me. I'm not lit up that well to where it's not going to make for a favorable image. All right. We're going to turn that back on. All right. And now I'm back. Next light we're going to disconnect is what we call the background light. A background light is very important in the picture. All right, as you can see behind me, it's off. Beforehand, you probably didn't even notice it was on until it went off. Now the image is flat. We're going to turn that back on. And the last light we're going to talk about, this is called a rim light. The rim light is the little strip of light that shows the side or the back of the subject. And we're going to turn that on, okay? And you can see the effect that it has on me. I have this side of me lit, and it can make the image more appealing, okay? Again, this can be applied easily to videography and photography. Manual settings. Okay, manual settings is something you want to start off learning. I would not encourage you at all to start off learning photography using automatic settings. You want to be able to manually set your ISO, your shutter speed, and your aperture yourselves. Because if you use manuals, automatic settings in your camera, you're going to end up wasting a lot of money because you're not going to use your camera to its fullest potential. All right. Last thing you want to do is spend thousands of dollars on a piece of equipment that's working for you and you're not operating it yourself. All right. Uh, when you use these manual settings, you're going to get the difference and you're going to see the difference between light and between shadow. Two elements you need in your photography are light and shadow. Some photos you need more light than shadow, and depending on the dramatics of the image you're trying to put out, you're going to need more shadow than light. But you cannot get that if you use automatic settings. When you use automatic settings, you're going to get an image that's lit all the way around, and there's not going to be no shadow in your image at all. All right, it's going to be mostly light because that's basically what your camera is programmed to do. It's programmed to eliminate shadow and make light. It's going to make that photo even all the way around. You're not going to see any type of dramatic effects in that photo. And one thing you want to show off in your photos are how dramatic that picture can get between light and shadow. ISO, right? ISO is basically when you can adjust it to where you're going to let more light into your sensor or less light into the sensor. When it comes to ISO, the more light you let into it, the more what we call noise you'll see in the picture. And depending on the type of image you're trying to give off, noise could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. For example, if you are trying to do a picture that's uh, based in the 1940s, you want to have your talent come dressed like, in some old school 1940s gear, or maybe you want to have them stand in front of an old school classic vehicle. Maybe a little noise would be a good thing. So I would say in the daytime, bump that up. And if you don't want to, you can always put that noise in at post edit. We'll get on what post edit is at a later session. But the main purpose of ISO is to basically allow you to get adequate light in dark situations in a dark room. I would not recommend you go over 1600 on ISO because after 1600 you're going to see a lot of noise when it comes to video, when it comes to photography as well. In a daytime situation, the probability of you needing to get to ISO 1600 is zero. When you're on daytime, we can go, ISO starts from 100 on up. It can get up there depending on the type of camera you're at. We're talking about 64,000 and then some, all right? But in this situation, we'll keep it simple, all right? In daytime, you never have to go over 100 ISO. If you're shooting in the daytime or shooting in any type of light, most likely you can stay on that 100. In dark situations, like you're in a club, you're going to have to bump that up. But again, never go over 1600. Right now, we're going to bump the ISO while I'm talking to give you an example of what noise is. We could crank that up. Where are we at now?
102,400.
All right, well, that's a lot of ISO. All right, so you may notice a lot of grain, okay, which is also known as noise in the image. That's because the ISO is pretty high, all right, and it can make the picture unflattering depending on the effect you're trying to get out of it, okay, and that's ISO. Shutter speed. Shutter speed is a thing that determines how long your lens is open from the moment you press that shutter. All right, and that lens can be open anywhere between a fraction of a second to 30 seconds, and depending on your camera, possibly longer. All right, because technology is evolving, and there's no limit to anything anymore these days. All right, so if you're in a well-lit environment, Let's say you're outside in the daylight. You can set your shutter speed to a fraction of a second, and enough light. The light's so powerful outside, you're gonna get enough light in that lens to light your subject pretty well. If you're in a room like this, where we have more controlled lighting, you may want to adjust that shutter speed to compensate for what you're working with in a real life environment. So of course it won't be a fraction of a second, but that shutter speed will most likely be at, I want to say, probably like 1 second. Actually, still be at a fraction of a second. Think about it. So scratch that part off. Now, if you're in a dark room, all right, in that dark room, you're going to need that shutter speed high. I'm not going to say as high as possible because it depends on how dark the room is. But if all of these lights were off in this room, including the lights in the ceiling, you will most likely need to set that shutter speed to 30 seconds. And we're talking about the minute you hit that snap, you got to count to 30 before that snap releases. And then it displays your picture. Because as long as that shutter speed is open, it's letting any available light in that room to come into that sensor, and it's going to light you up. So if I had a flashlight, lit up in that corner, believe it or not, in a totally dark room, I would probably come out pretty well exposed. That is the purpose of shutter speed. How long you're going to keep that lens open versus how soon it's going to close. All right. If you've ever hit that lens and you heard one click and you wonder where's the other snap, is because if you look at your manual settings, most likely you got that shutter speed at a long exposure, and about 30 seconds later, you're going to hear that click again. And it doesn't mean your camera's broken. It means just maybe you need to change the settings. And that's shutter speed, breaking it down. Briefly breaking it down. Aperture. You ever looked at a photo and the background was blurred out and the foreground was perfectly in focus? Now, when I say a foreground, I'm going to associate your foreground with the subject. So your subject was perfectly in focus and your background was blurred. Or vice versa. If you ever looked at a movie and you're seeing a character standing behind them, your main subject, but they're the ones talking, but your main subject is listening, and they focus totally in on the person behind you, behind the character, as they're talking, and then when the main character starts talking, it focuses on him, and at that point, the character on the background is blurred out. That is all controlled by what we call an aperture. This is also known as an f-stop. Okay, that f-stop settings. If you ever seen something like 1.2, 1.4, 1.6, or whatnot, all those are very low settings on f-stops that will really bring out what we call the bokeh effect. Okay, it'll really bring that out, the blurred subject. Now, if you want your entire subject to be totally in focus, or you want everything to be seen, you're going to need to go with a higher f-stop. I would say f-stop 10 or above. But if you go up on that f-stop, you're going to have to change some other manual settings to compensate for what you're losing in the other settings. All right. So, for example, if you go up on the f-stop, at that point, that would mean you would need to make some changes on your shutter speed or maybe your ISO. All right. So keep that in mind. But yes, the aperture is what controls that blurred, rather it being a foreground or background. Most of the time, if you're using a macro lens is a lens you use to get closer to the subject to where you can see the face on a housefly. All right, stuff like that. That is where very low f-stop comes in handy, because what's going on in the background doesn't even matter. What you're pouring to focus on is the face of that fly. And when you're in a zoomed in setting like that, that f-stop is going to pretty much really bring that picture out. All right. So that's basically an f-stop, summed up. And we could get more into that as well. So to sum it up, we talked about ISO, aperture, shutter speed, lighting, and the purpose of lighting, and the purpose of each of those three elements. All right. Um, Lighting is the most important part of photography and videography. Without lighting, there is no photography and videography. So, and when I say this, don't think you have to invest in the most expensive lighting kit. Okay, this is not really about that. It's really about what you know and how you do it. You honestly, in a sense, you don't really have to invest in the most expensive camera. Now, someone down the line, I would suggest so because you'll be able to do certain things that intermediate camera can't do, such as get very sharp images, or very great images in low light with no noise. All right. Now that's when you graduate on to the bigger things. Other than that, if you're just starting off and you don't know how deep you're going to get off into this, you really don't have to invest in a very in expensive equipment. Lighting to me is light. If you can find something that gives off light, then you can find something that gives off a great image. So when it comes to strobes, depending on what you want, if you don't mind plugging stuff in, I say get yourself something that you plug into a wall. If you feel you're gonna be going on location and be going to different sites and moving around a lot, get your lighting kit that has a battery to it that you could take anywhere you want. You don't have to plug it in anywhere. Okay, but lighting, very important element of photography and videography. If you don't have it, you're not going to be able to put off anything great when it comes to photography or videography. I'm going to post a link right here. Okay, it's going to give you a triangle type uh, example of ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. Okay, you can explain so much with these three elements just by talking about it. All right, so this is going to give you a better example of what I'm speaking of when I say once you change one, you got to change the other as far as the setting goes. All right, so make sure you click this link, okay, and check it out. You get a lot from it, trust me. For the next class, we're going to focus on what is portrait photography, what is landscape photography, what is documentary photography. We're going to also speak on contrast. We're going to also speak on rule of thirds. Okay, it's going to be very exciting classes. You're going to get a lot from it. All right, and I'll see you next class.